So the fairly boring and usually forgettable nation of Canada...
Canada is like a loft apartment over a really great party, you know?
That place has once again demonstrated that they may disagree with what you say, and they will put you in jail for fucking saying it. Toronto-based street artist Gregory Alan Elliott is currently on trial in the great nation of Canada for disagreeing with a feminist. And I wish that was as ridiculous as it sounds, but unfortunately, the world seems to have lost its fucking mind. In 2012, Gregory made the mistake of crossing Twitter swords with a woman by the name of Stephanie Guthrie, a self-described feminist advocate and gender justice consultant?
What? That's not a thing!
Well, apparently it is now, and one of the perks of this job appears to be the warrant to cyberbully and ultimately call the police when people you encounter have political opinions that differ from your own. Basically, Elliott witnessed Guthrie Twitter dogpile and publicly dox a young kid by the name of Bendelin Spur, who up until then nobody had pretty much heard of. Spur's crime was essentially to create a video game that feminists didn't like. Okay, he created a game where players could physically assault feminist video game critic Anita Sarkeesian, and it should be noted that not long before that he'd done an exact same version of that game, but with another video game critic at the center, a guy by the name of Jack Thompson, and nobody gave a fuck, right? Nobody gave a rat's ass. It was the specific fact that Sarkeesian in this case was a woman and a feminist that caused Guthrie to lose her shit. And Gregory Alan Elliott probably noticed this double standard. He certainly noticed the fact that these feminists were attempting to essentially destroy this young kid's life and dox him to his employers in an attempt to get him fired, which is a total fucking disgrace, right? And he called them out on it, which I think he's perfectly entitled to do. And I would submit that anyone with a reasonable sense of morality would agree with that. Elliott wanted to point out that the cyberbullying tactics of Guthrie and her feminist media mafia was essentially no better than the actions of the kid who made the game. But alas, trying to reason with cult leaders like Guthrie is like trying to break rocks with fucking eggs. And by November of that year, after a brief exchange of tweets, Guthrie and another feminist had filed criminal harassment charges against Elliott because, hey, if you're not with us, you're against us, and if you're against us, anything kind of goes.
Join us. Never. Join us or die. God and King Richard!
Now, I know this matters to a lot of you, so let's just be clear. None of Elliott's tweets could be misconstrued as being threatening toward Guthrie, as overly aggressive, or as harassment by any sane definition of those words, right? First of all, it's practically impossible to fucking harass somebody on Twitter, okay? Do you know why? Because Twitter has a block button function, and the moment Elliott started tweeting towards Guthrie, trying to engage her in this dialogue, she utilized it. She blocked him straight away because, you know, she's a feminist, and feminists, the last thing they want to do is have an actual conversation with a critic, right? So she blocks him. So from that point on, the only way that he can really, quote unquote, harass her is if she goes looking for him, right? If she is monitoring his feed and essentially eavesdropping on his discussions, looking for something to be upset by. And that seems to be exactly what has happened. But just so you get a sense of the kind of tweet that Elliott was firing in her direction, here's an example of an exchange that took place. In response to being slandered a pervert by one of Guthrie's feminist cronies, he says, "You are wrong on all counts. Go listen to Guthrie play her shit music inside crappy bars with your loser faux feminist friends." And this is clearly the response of a madman, right? I mean, what we obviously need to do is grab the pitchforks and the flaming torches, because this guy is a demonstrable threat to society and we should lock him up. Right, Canada? Right?
You can't do that.
But here's the problem. We are not dealing with rational, well-reasoned and well-intentioned people here. We are dealing with the social justice lynch mob, and as we are all kind of aware at this stage, their lunacy knows no limits. For example, these criminal harassment charges appear to center around the idea that Guthrie and others, based upon the tweets that Gregory was putting out, reasonably feared for their safety. I mean, she is that fucking retarded that she actually is trying to convince the criminal justice system of Canada that when Gregory Alan Elliott tweets out something like this, he's just a stone's throw away from becoming this guy. In other words, she's fucking nuts, okay? Either that, or she's making the whole hurt feelings bullshit up, which is entirely possible. So, for example, some YouTube commentators like Sargon of Akkad, who's done a video on this that I'll link to in the description, seem to be of the opinion that she was never frightened of Elliott, right? She's totally full of shit and is simply persecuting this guy cynically as a means of advancing her own political agenda, and he might very well be right. But regardless of whether or not she's crazy or wicked, the result is the same, and there is only one victim here. That victim is Elliott. He is the victim of the local police force. He's the victim of the Canadian government. He's the victim of his former employer that's fired him. And he's the victim of this ragtag group of social justice thought policing feminists who are pissed that he disagrees with them politically. And that is not grounds for fucking prosecution, Canada. 1984 was not supposed to be a fucking instruction manual. I mean, Jesus fucking Christ. Very rarely in life do you come across moral situations that are clear-cut, for which there is a right answer, and the answer is so obvious that opposing sides come across, as I hate to say it, but just as pieces of shit. I don't know how else to describe somebody who thinks you should not be allowed to express your political opinions on Twitter if they divert from the norm as considered by certain sections of society. And that's ultimately the reason why I wanted to make this video, because Elliott appears to be in debt roughly to the tune of 90,000 Canadian dollars and does not seem to have any practical way of paying this back without help. A Twitter trial support fund has been set up in his name. I have donated to it. I suggest that you follow the link, and if you feel the same way as I do, give what you can. I have also included in the description other videos on this case, some of which go into the situation in a lot more detail than I have. I've only really scratched the surface, and I think it's very important for you to go away and find out the details. This is one of those generational cases that I truly believe everybody should know about, understand, and most importantly, have an informed opinion about. And I'll just leave you with excerpts of my favourite recorded monologue on free speech and the importance of defending it, along with the dialectic process in general, because make no mistake, this case is not just about the persecution of one person. If situations like this go unchallenged by good people, then they can very easily lead to a kind of enforced consensus and tyranny that we have been spending centuries as a species trying to escape from. Each generation is tasked with the defense of the liberties it was granted at birth. Let's get on with it.
It's not just the right of the person who speaks to be heard. It is the right of everyone in the audience to listen and to hear. And every time you silence somebody, you make yourself a prisoner of your own action because you deny yourself the right to hear something. In other words, your own right to hear and be exposed is as much involved in all these cases as is the right of the other to voice his or her view. My great friend John O'Sullivan, former editor of the National Review, and I think probably my most conservative and reactionary Catholic friend, once said, it's a tiny thought experiment, he says, if you hear the Pope saying he believes in God, you think, well, the Pope's doing his job again today. If you hear the Pope saying he's really begun to doubt the existence of God, you begin to think he might be onto something. Well, if everybody in North America is forced to attend at school training in sensitivity on Holocaust awareness and is taught to study the final solution about which nothing was actually done by this country or North America or the United Kingdom while it was going on, but let's say as if in compensation for that everyone's made to swallow an official and unalterable story of it now, and it's taught as the great moral exemplar, the moral equivalent of the morally lacking elements of the Second World War, the way of stilling our uneasy conscience about that combat. If that's the case with everybody, as it more or less is, and one person gets up and says, you know about this Holocaust, I'm not sure it even happened. In fact, I'm pretty certain it didn't. Indeed, I begin to wonder if the only thing is that the Jews brought a little bit of violence on themselves. That person doesn't just have a right to speak. That person's right to speak must be given extra protection, because what he has to say must have taken him some effort to come up with, might contain a grain of historical truth, might in any case give people to think about why do they know what they already think they know. How do I know that I know this, except that I've always been taught this and never heard anything else? It's always worth establishing first principles. It's always worth saying, what would you do if you met a Flat Earth Society member? Come to think of it, how can I prove the Earth is round? Am I sure about the theory of evolution? I know it's supposed to be true. Here's someone who says there's no such thing, it's all intelligent design. How sure am I of my own views? Don't take refuge in the false security of consensus and the feeling that whatever you think, you're bound to be okay because you're in the safely moral majority. One of the proudest moments of my life, that's to say, in the recent past, has been defending the British historian David Irving, who is now in prison in Austria for nothing more than the potential of uttering an unwelcome thought on Austrian soil. He didn't actually say anything in Austria. He wasn't even accused of saying anything. He was accused of perhaps planning to say something that violated an Austrian law that says only one version of the history of the Second World War may be taught in our brave little Tyrolean republic. The republic that gave us Kurt Waldheim as Secretary General of the United Nations, a man wanted in several countries for war crimes. You know, the country that has Jörg Haider, the leader of its own fascist party, in the cabinet that sent David Irving to jail. You know the two things that have made Austria famous, given it its reputation, by any chance? Just while I've got you. I hope there are some Austrians here to be upset by it. Well, a pity if not, but the two great achievements of Austria are to have convinced the world that Hitler was German and Beethoven was Viennese. Now to this proud record they can add, they have the courage finally to face their past and lock up a British historian who's committed no crime except that of thought and writing. And that's a scandal. And I can't find a seconder usually when I propose this, but I don't care. I don't need a seconder. My own opinion is enough for me, and I claim the right to have it defended against any consensus, any majority, anywhere, any place, any time. And anyone who disagrees with this can pick a number, get online, and kiss my ass.